My son told me he'd be out of town for Christmas, so I spent the night alone. Until I discovered the truth, he was at a lavish party with his wife's family. That night, something inside me broke. I stayed silent, but my revenge was only beginning. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. Christmas had always been my favorite time of the year. The lights, the warm smells of cinnamon and pine, the sound of carols playing faintly in the distance, they used to make me feel alive. Every year, I'd spend hours decorating the tree, carefully hanging each ornament, most of them collected over decades of memories with my family. I always thought Christmas was about togetherness, about family sitting under one roof, sharing laughter, love, and stories. But this year, something felt different. I had been waiting for my son's call all December. Every year, without fail, he would ask me to come over, to spend Christmas Eve with him and his wife, just like old times. But days passed, and the silence stretched longer than ever before. Finally, one chilly evening, my phone buzzed. It was him. Relief rushed through me, until I heard his voice. There was something strange about the way he spoke, a coldness I hadn't felt before. He told me he wouldn't be in town for Christmas this year. Said he and his wife had plans elsewhere, something about traveling, some excuse that sounded rehearsed. I forced a smile as I responded, pretending I understood. I didn't want to sound needy, but inside, my chest felt heavy. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the Christmas tree I'd decorated myself. The blinking lights felt almost mocking. I wrapped my hands around a mug of cocoa, hoping the warmth would seep into my bones, but my heart stayed cold. I told myself it was fine, that maybe they just wanted some time alone this year. I tried to believe it. But deep down, something gnawed at me, a quiet voice whispering that he wasn't telling me the full story. The days crawled by, and Christmas Eve arrived like a cruel reminder of my loneliness. I cooked a small dinner for myself, trying to recreate old traditions, but the silence in the house was deafening. No laughter, no clinking glasses, no sound of wrapping paper tearing. Just me, my plate, and the faint hum of a carol on the radio. Then, fate played its cruel trick. Late that evening, my neighbor came by with a plate of freshly baked cookies. While chatting casually, she mentioned something offhand. She had seen my son's car parked outside his wife's parents' house earlier that day. My stomach tightened instantly, but I forced my expression to stay neutral. I nodded, thanked her for the cookies, and wished her a Merry Christmas. Inside, though, my heart was pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. I waited until she left before sinking into the armchair, my hands gripping the plate so tightly I thought it might crack. He had lied. My son had lied straight to my face. He wasn't out of town. He wasn't busy. He was just somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't invited. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I had become invisible in my own family. I sat there for hours, staring blankly at the lights, my mind running wild with memories. I remembered the nights I stayed awake when he had fevers, the years I worked extra shifts so I could buy him the toys he wanted, the times I skipped meals so he wouldn't go hungry. And now, I couldn't even get a seat at his Christmas table. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head, but one feeling rose above them all: rage. Not the kind that makes you scream or break things, but the quiet, cold kind that settles deep into your bones. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't call him. Instead, I made a promise to myself that night. If he thought he could erase me from his life, if he thought he could lie to me and celebrate behind my back, then he had underestimated me. I wasn't just going to sit here and swallow the pain. No, this wasn't going to end quietly. That Christmas Eve, sitting alone in my living room, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to take revenge. The morning after Christmas, I woke up with a heaviness pressing against my chest. My house was quiet, but my mind was screaming. The memory of last night, of my neighbor casually mentioning my son's car parked outside his wife's parents' house, haunted me like a ghost I couldn't shake off. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, feeling the ache twist deeper with every passing minute. I had spent weeks convincing myself his excuse was real, that maybe they needed a break or had planned a quick getaway. But now, the truth burned in my chest like fire: he wasn't away. He wasn't busy. He was right here in town, laughing, eating, celebrating Christmas. Just not with me. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I couldn't sit there any longer. The thought of him smiling with her family while I sat alone in my house gnawed at me until I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I grabbed my coat and keys. My heart pounded in my ears, a steady rhythm of betrayal and anger, each beat louder than the last. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. I just needed to see it for myself. The drive across town felt endless. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, my knuckles pale against the cold leather. Every streetlight blurred as the images in my head grew sharper, my son sitting at a table surrounded by people who weren't me, clinking glasses, opening gifts, laughing without a single thought about me sitting alone. Finally, I turned onto the quiet street where his wife's parents lived. The air was crisp, frost hugging the edges of the windows, and my breath formed little clouds as I parked a few houses away, far enough to stay hidden. I sat there in silence, the hum of the car engine low and steady, staring at the warm glow spilling out of their windows. The driveway was full. Cars lined both sides of the street, shiny, polished, belonging to people who were welcomed inside. And there it was, parked neatly at the front, my son's car. My heart sank, a hollow weight pressing harder against my ribs. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I heard it, muffled music, faint laughter, and voices carrying through the cold winter air. It wasn't the sound of strangers. It was the sound of family. A family that I wasn't part of. I leaned forward, staring through the narrow gap between the curtains where the living room lights poured out. Inside, I saw shadows moving, arms gesturing, people raising glasses, exchanging gifts, and smiling like they had no care in the world. I squinted, and there he was, my son. My own blood, sitting at the center of it all, a glass in his hand, laughing harder than I'd seen him laugh in years. I froze. It felt like someone had poured ice water straight into my veins. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. All I could do was watch. I thought about everything I had given him. The nights I stayed awake when he was sick. The years I skipped vacations, worked extra hours, drained my savings just to give him the life he wanted. I thought about the Christmas mornings when I scraped together money I didn't have, just to see his little face light up when he opened a gift he'd been dreaming about. I thought about the man I raised, the boy I carried, the sacrifices I made. And now, here I was, sitting outside in the freezing cold while he built a new life where I didn't exist. My hand gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Every laugh that came from that house stabbed me like a knife, twisting deeper each time. He wasn't just celebrating without me, he had lied. He had erased me, like I didn't matter. For a moment, I thought about walking up to the door, pounding until they opened it, demanding answers, demanding respect. But then, something in me shifted. Confrontation wouldn't give me peace. Screaming wouldn't erase the betrayal. No. I wanted something better. I wanted him to feel what I felt. To taste the cold silence, the sting of exclusion, the weight of being forgotten. But my revenge wasn't going to be loud or messy. It was going to be quiet, sharp, and unforgettable. I took one last long look at the house, my eyes locking on the man I once thought would never turn his back on me. Then I started the car, the soft rumble breaking the stillness of the night, and slowly drove away without looking back. On the way home, the streets were still lined with twinkling lights, cheerful decorations, and happy families gathered in their living rooms. To anyone else, the night was perfect, but inside me, something had cracked, and in that brokenness, something else was born. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to make him regret this Christmas for the rest of his life. I didn't sleep that night. The hours stretched endlessly as I sat in the dim glow of the Christmas lights, staring at nothing, listening to the silence that pressed against the walls. Every laugh I had heard from that house still echoed in my head like a cruel reminder, bouncing around inside my skull until it burned. I replayed everything over and over again. His excuses, his soft tone when he said he would be out of town, the way he pretended he was busy while, in reality, he was just busy celebrating with everyone except me. That was the moment something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about one Christmas. This wasn't just about one lie. This was about years of giving, sacrificing, and bending over backward for him, only to be treated like a disposable piece of his past. I raised him. I gave him everything. And now, I was nothing more than an afterthought. Not anymore. At first, I thought revenge meant confrontation, storming into his life, screaming until he understood the pain he had caused. But no. That would only give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. No, I wanted him to feel something deeper. I wanted him to feel invisible. I started thinking about what mattered most to him. I knew his patterns, his weaknesses, his dependencies. He had built his life around comfort, the home I helped him buy, the business I quietly invested in, the trust fund he assumed was his safety net. Every stone in the foundation of his success had my fingerprints on it. And that was where I would begin. The next morning, I made a list. It wasn't written down on paper. It lived in my head, clear and sharp like glass. Every favor, every dollar, every connection I had ever handed him. He had forgotten just how much of his world existed because of me. But I hadn't forgotten. I started making calls. Not angry calls. Quiet ones. Subtle ones. I reached out to old friends, business partners, people who owed me favors, the same network I had once used to support him. I didn't explain why, and I didn't have to. Doors that had been wide open for him started to close, one by one, without him even realizing it yet. I also called my lawyer. We sat down in his office the following day, the soft hum of the heater filling the room while I reviewed documents I hadn't looked at in years. My name was on more than my son remembered. Properties, accounts, investments, pieces of a puzzle he thought belonged to him. But he had made one mistake. He underestimated how quietly I could rearrange everything. Within a week, I had moved assets, shifted ownerships, and adjusted investments, locking away everything I once promised him. The financial safety net he relied on had been pulled, thread by thread, but he wouldn't notice. Not yet. At night, I sat by my window, staring at the snow falling softly under the streetlights. The pain was still there, heavy and raw, but beneath it, something else grew. Power. Control. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt like I was steering the wheel again. Revenge wasn't about shouting or breaking. It was about patience. Precision. It was about letting him live in his comfort, unaware that the ground beneath him was slowly giving way. I started imagining the look on his face when the consequences reached him, not today, not tomorrow, but soon. When the doors he once walked through easily would stay closed. When the phone calls he expected wouldn't come. When the things he took for granted would suddenly, quietly, no longer be his. I didn't need him to know it was me. At least, not yet. There was something far more satisfying about letting him sit in confusion first, watching everything slip through his fingers while he struggled to understand why. The image of him laughing at that party burned brighter in my memory with every passing day, fueling me, sharpening me, pushing me further. He thought I was invisible. He thought I would stay quiet, forgotten, discarded. But I wasn't invisible. I was the shadow he never saw coming. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. The first cracks in his perfect little world appeared sooner than I expected. At first, they were small, almost invisible. But I noticed them. I noticed everything. It started with a simple call from him, cheerful and fake, pretending like Christmas hadn't happened. His voice carried that same rehearsed tone, full of empty warmth. He told me how busy he'd been with work, how exhausted he was from all the traveling. I sat there, listening, letting him spin his web of lies while my silence filled the spaces between his words. I didn't challenge him. I didn't ask questions. I let him believe I was still the clueless, forgotten parent sitting in the background of his life, grateful for the scraps of his attention. My calmness must have reassured him because he kept talking, blissfully unaware of what was already happening behind the scenes. 2 days later, the first shift came. One of his key business deals, a contract he had been banking on, suddenly fell through. He didn't know I was connected to one of the stakeholders. He didn't know I had already spoken to them, gently planting doubts about his reliability. No anger, no accusations, just quiet influence. By the end of that week, another client pulled out. Small blows, strategically placed, each one aimed where it hurt most. But I wasn't careless. Everything was subtle, calculated. I wanted the damage to feel natural, like bad luck slowly unraveling his stability. I wanted him to start doubting himself, his choices, the people around him. The next time we spoke, I heard the edge in his voice, the faint tension creeping in as he casually mentioned how stressful work had been lately. I almost smiled, but I kept my tone soft, pretending to sympathize. He had no idea I was the quiet storm circling his life. Meanwhile, I deepened my reach into his world. His house, the same one I'd helped him buy, had paperwork he barely paid attention to. A few careful adjustments to the property's financial structure, and suddenly, the monthly expenses weren't as comfortable as before. Not enough to drown him, but enough to make him sweat. And then, there was his wife's family. The same people he'd chosen over me on Christmas. The same house full of laughter and lights that I had watched from the cold street outside. I learned more about them than they probably knew about themselves. Investments, debts, weak spots, all of it. Within a month, I quietly became a silent investor in their family business. They welcomed my money eagerly, blind to the fact that it came from the person they had shut out. I didn't want control immediately. I wanted influence. I wanted a seat at the table they thought I wasn't worthy of, and I got it without anyone even realizing. I watched from the shadows as the balance shifted, piece by piece. The business started leaning on me, unknowingly tying their future to my decisions. And eventually, those decisions would ripple straight into my son's life. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the snow pile higher on the sidewalks, thinking about how silence can be louder than any scream. He thought he'd gotten away with it, the lie, the exclusion, the betrayal. But the truth was, the game had only just begun. By February, subtle panic had started creeping into his calls. He mentioned cash flow problems, clients backing out, unexpected bills piling up. His voice cracked when he laughed, like he was trying to convince himself everything was fine. I gave him nothing, no comfort, no clues, no sympathy. The silence became my weapon. But I knew this was just the beginning. Small cracks weren't enough. I didn't want him just worried. I wanted him broken, standing in the middle of his perfect life, watching it collapse around him without ever understanding why. He had built his little castle on foundations I'd laid for him. Now, I was pulling out the stones, one by one, while he smiled and waved, too blind to see the walls leaning in. And soon, I wouldn't just be watching from the shadows. I was going to step into the light. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. By the time New Year's Eve approached, the anger inside me had settled into something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous than before. The pieces were moving quietly, perfectly, just the way I wanted. His business had started wobbling. Little cracks were spreading, and though he didn't know why, he was feeling the pressure. But I wasn't ready to reveal anything yet. No, I wanted the first confrontation to happen somewhere he felt untouchable. Somewhere he thought he was safe. That place came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, an old friend called me and mentioned that my son and his wife's family were planning a lavish New Year's Eve party. A big celebration, expensive, flashy, the kind of thing they love to show off. My friend had an invitation and offered me one, too, just to drop by. At first, I almost refused, but then the thought hit me. This was perfect. I wasn't going there to shout. I wasn't going there to fight. I was going to walk into that house like I belonged there. Because deep down, I did. The night of the party, I dressed carefully. A dark suit, polished shoes, the same watch my son once admired when he was younger. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the man who sat alone on Christmas Eve anymore. I saw someone dangerous. Someone who had learned patience. Someone who understood the power of silence. When I arrived, the street was packed with luxury cars, shimmering under the glow of decorative lights. The house stood there proudly, windows glowing, music spilling into the cold night air. I parked at the edge of the street, taking one long breath before stepping out. Inside, the house was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and bursts of laughter. People in elegant clothes mingled around, champagne in hand, celebrating the arrival of a new year. And there he was, my son, standing near the bar, glass in hand, his smile wide and confident. For a moment, I just watched him from across the room. He looked relaxed, comfortable, as if Christmas had never happened, as if I didn't exist. That was when something inside me shifted again. Not sadness. Not anger. Just clarity. I started walking, slow, deliberate steps across the marble floor. Heads turned as I passed. Some people recognized me, offering polite nods and smiles. His wife's family certainly didn't expect me there. I could see the flicker of surprise on their faces. But I greeted them warmly, casually, as if everything was perfectly normal. And then, finally, he saw me. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but I caught it. The smallest crack in his perfect performance. He straightened, adjusted his jacket, and forced a laugh, trying to recover, trying to hide the sudden stiffness in his shoulders. I didn't speak first. I didn't need to. I simply raised my glass, nodded slightly, and let my presence speak louder than any words ever could. The room around us carried on buzzing, but for him, time slowed. I could see the unease in his eyes. He didn't know why I was there, what I knew, or what I was planning, and that uncertainty was my weapon. I mingled with the guests, speaking to people he respected, people he wanted to impress. I slipped into conversations effortlessly, earning smiles and laughter, placing myself exactly where he didn't want me to be, at the center of attention. Every time I glanced his way, he was watching me, his grip on his glass tightening, his laughter sounding more forced by the minute. That night, I didn't confront him, didn't mention Christmas, didn't give away a single piece of my plan. Instead, I made sure he saw how calm, collected, and in control I was. It wasn't anger he felt, it was confusion. And confusion grows into fear faster than any explosion ever could. Before leaving, I made sure to speak to his wife's parents, thanking them warmly for the lovely evening. Her mother smiled awkwardly, her father muttered something polite, and I could see it in their eyes, they knew something was off. Seeds of doubt, planted quietly, without me ever saying a word. I left without looking back, my footsteps slow and steady, the winter air sharp against my face as I stepped outside. Behind me, the music carried on, the laughter continued, but I knew his night was ruined. He would lie awake replaying every second of my visit, wondering why I came, what I knew, and what was coming next. And that was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't finished. Not even close. The real game hadn't started yet. This was only the first move. After the New Year's party, I knew I had gotten under his skin. I could see it in his face, even when he tried to mask it behind his fake smiles and forced laughter. My unexpected presence had rattled him, but that was only the beginning. That night wasn't my revenge, it was my warning shot. Quiet, sharp, and unforgettable. The real game began the next morning. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping black coffee, while snow fell softly outside my window. My mind wasn't resting. It was working faster than ever, piecing together every thread of his life, every dependency, every weakness. I didn't need loud confrontations or messy drama. No, my plan was elegant, invisible, like frost creeping over glass. The first step was control. I had helped fund his business when he was struggling years ago, writing checks without hesitation, thinking I was securing his future. He'd built his little empire thinking he did it all himself, forgetting the quiet foundation I laid for him. That foundation? It still had my name on it. Within 2 weeks, I contacted a few influential friends, people he didn't even know I had ties with. Deals that once sailed through effortlessly suddenly started stalling. Approvals got lost in the system. Payments were delayed. Clients, confused and nervous, began pulling out. From the outside, it looked like bad timing, just a string of bad luck. To him, it probably felt like the universe had turned against him. But I knew better. The universe wasn't involved. I was. The second step was his wife's family. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. The same people he celebrated with on Christmas Eve, the ones who welcomed him into their perfect little circle while leaving me outside in the cold, sipping cocoa and staring at my lonely tree, I wanted to get close to them. Closer than he'd ever expect. Their family business was in expansion mode, and I knew they were looking for investors. I reached out quietly, through mutual connections, presenting myself as nothing more than an interested partner. They jumped at the opportunity, thrilled to have my support. By the end of the month, I became a silent investor, one of the largest. And just like that, without them realizing, I'd woven myself into their foundation. Their success now depended on me, and by extension, so did his. I wasn't standing outside their world anymore. I owned a part of it. The third step was patience. I didn't want to strike fast. I wanted him to live comfortably for a while, unaware of how fragile his perfect little bubble was becoming. I wanted him to plan, to relax, to think everything was fine, while, behind the scenes, I slowly tightened the noose. And so, I waited. I watched. By February, the first signs of trouble started showing on his face. He called me one evening, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in his voice. His biggest client had just walked away. His suppliers were being unresponsive. Suddenly, unexpected expenses were piling up. I listened quietly, murmuring soft, meaningless responses, giving him nothing. No comfort. No clues. No lifeline. When he hung up, I imagined him sitting there, staring at the wall, feeling a storm creeping in without knowing where it came from. Meanwhile, I was working on the next phase, influence. With my silent stake in his wife's family business, I started redirecting decisions subtly, shaping outcomes without making a sound. Things he relied on started shifting. Partnerships dissolved. Opportunities slipped away. Projects he thought were secure suddenly collapsed. Every move I made was precise, invisible. No mess, no noise, no direct confrontation. And that was what made it so effective. He couldn't fight what he couldn't see. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in my living room with the lights off, sipping a glass of whiskey, thinking about that Christmas Eve. I'd picture him inside that warm, glowing house, surrounded by laughter and love, while I sat in the cold, unwanted. And then I'd think about how much colder it must feel now, realizing control was slipping through his fingers, without him even knowing why. This wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even revenge. This was art. But even art has a climax. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but I wanted him to reach a point where confusion turned into desperation. I wanted him questioning everyone around him, his wife, her family, his business partners, until paranoia started eating him alive from the inside out. By the time spring arrived, I knew the tipping point was near. The cracks I'd made in his perfect facade were growing wider every day, and soon, one sharp push would send everything collapsing. And when that moment came, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd only need to look him in the eye, and he'd know exactly who pulled the strings. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. By March, the quiet game was starting to show its effects. The small cracks I had carefully carved into his perfect little world were spreading faster than even I expected. His business was wobbling, his clients were restless, and his wife's family had unknowingly tied themselves deeper into my influence. But I didn't strike yet. No, I waited. I wanted him restless, doubting, frustrated. I wanted him pacing the floors at night, replaying every mistake he'd ever made, wondering why the walls were closing in around him. It didn't take long. One cold evening, just after sunset, my phone buzzed. His name lit up on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring twice before answering, my voice calm and collected, as though I had no idea about the storm brewing in his life. His voice, though. It was different. The fake confidence, the polished tone he always used, gone. There was an edge of panic he couldn't hide anymore. He asked if I knew why one of his biggest accounts had just dropped him without warning. He asked if I'd heard about suppliers refusing to work with him. He stumbled over his words, trying to make sense of his crumbling world. I said nothing helpful. No comfort. No answers. Just short, cold sentences that gave him nothing to hold on to. He grew frustrated. I could hear it in the way his breathing quickened, his voice rising just slightly as he tried to sound in control. But control had already slipped through his fingers. And he knew it. After a long silence, he muttered something about bad luck, trying to convince himself more than me. I let him sit in that lie, offering no reassurance, no soft landing. Just silence. And silence, I realized, was far more powerful than anger. When the call ended, I pictured him sitting there, phone in hand, staring at the screen, wondering why I hadn't said more. Wondering if I knew something he didn't. Wondering who he could trust. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to accuse him or expose myself. His own thoughts were doing the work for me. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The next week, I pushed harder. I leveraged my influence in his wife's family business, shifting deals, slowing approvals, and subtly redirecting opportunities away from him. It wasn't obvious, just small delays, little rejections, but enough to make him feel like the ground beneath him was giving way. And it worked. By the end of the month, his once perfect demeanor was cracking. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he'd been snapping at employees, arguing with his wife, drinking more than usual. He had started calling his lawyer late at night, demanding answers he wouldn't get. The man who once stood so tall now looked over his shoulder wherever he went, unsure of who was pulling the strings. He had no idea it was me. Not yet. But paranoia is a funny thing. It doesn't need proof to grow. It feeds on silence, on confusion, on the subtle feeling that something isn't right. I watched from a distance as he started doubting everyone around him, his business partners, his friends, even his wife's family. Every time he questioned them, they pushed back, creating friction, resentment, and tension where there used to be trust. Exactly as I intended. Then came the night he showed up at my house. It was late, past midnight, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find him standing there, shoulders tense, eyes dark and restless. He didn't yell, didn't accuse me, not yet. Instead, He stood there quietly, his voice low, asking if I knew what was happening. I met his gaze, calm and steady, and told him the truth, the kind of truth that stings without giving away anything. Life has a way of balancing itself out. Sometimes, what you give is what you get back. That was it. That was all I said. He stared at me, searching my face for answers, for guilt, for anything he could hold on to. But I gave him nothing. No reaction. No explanation. Just silence. And that silence broke him more than any accusation ever could. He left that night with more questions than he came with. And I knew he wouldn't sleep. I knew he'd lie awake replaying every moment, trying to piece together something that wasn't meant to make sense. By now, I had everything where I wanted it. His confidence was gone. His stability was shaking. His relationships were splintering. And worst of all, his trust, in everyone and everything, was collapsing. But I wasn't done yet. The next move would be the one he'd never recover from. By April, the cracks had turned into fractures, and his perfect little world was collapsing faster than he could hold it together. The man who once stood tall and proud, the man who thought he had control over everything, was now unraveling, piece by piece, thread by thread. I had been patient. I had been silent. And now, my silence was louder than thunder. It started with the business. The deals he had counted on, the ones that would have carried him comfortably through the year, began falling apart one after another. A major contract he'd been boasting about suddenly vanished overnight when the client backed out. I knew why, of course. I had made the right calls, whispered in the right ears, redirected the right opportunities. But to him, it looked like fate had turned against him. Within weeks, his cash flow dried up. Deadlines were missed. Employees grew restless, some quitting without notice. The confident leader they once followed was now snapping at everyone, pacing the halls like a man being hunted. He tried to hide it, of course, but rumors spread faster than fire in a dry field. And they reached exactly where I wanted them to, his wife's family. The same family who had laughed and toasted together on Christmas Eve, leaving me to sit alone in my quiet house. They had welcomed him with open arms back then, but whispers of financial instability make loyalty disappear quickly. I made sure they heard those whispers louder than anyone else. At the same time, I subtly tightened my influence over their business. They had no idea how much power I held now, how many decisions depended on my approval. And with every new choice I made, I ensured one thing: his seat at their table grew smaller. Then came the dinner. It was late April when his wife's family hosted a small gathering, one I was, of course, quietly invited to through the influence I now held. When I walked in, the air shifted immediately. Conversations dipped, glances darted, and I saw his face pale the second he spotted me. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. I spent the evening talking with his in-laws, laughing softly, discussing investments, sipping wine while he stood in the corner pretending to be busy on his phone. The very family he thought would always back him had turned their attention elsewhere, to me. That night, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before: fear. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. But fear wasn't enough. Not yet. A week later, one of his accounts was frozen due to irregularities in funding. A second client walked away without explanation. And then, the final blow, the bank called in one of his loans, demanding immediate repayment. He scrambled, called everyone he knew, begged for extensions, but doors slammed one after another. The confident son who once laughed at that Christmas party was now drowning. By early May, I began hearing whispers of tension at home. His wife had started questioning his decisions, her family subtly doubting his abilities, and the once solid foundation of his marriage had begun to shake. Arguments spilled into the open, loud enough for neighbors to hear. Some nights, he left the house, wandering the streets, unable to face what waited inside. And through it all, I stayed silent. I didn't confront him. I didn't gloat. I didn't step forward to take credit. I wanted him to question everyone, his partners, his friends, even his wife. I wanted paranoia to eat him alive. Every glance became suspicious, every silence dangerous, every misstep fatal. By June, he wasn't the same man anymore. His shoulders slumped, his hair grayed faster, and his laughter, the one I once heard spilling out of that glowing house on Christmas Eve, had disappeared entirely. But I still wasn't finished. This wasn't about destroying his finances or breaking his pride. This was about teaching him something he could never forget, that betrayal has consequences. And the real consequence was still coming. Because up until now, Everything I had done was hidden. Silent. Unseen. But the next move would be loud. Everyone, his wife, her family, his friends, his business partners, they were all going to know the truth. Not about my revenge. Not about the strings I'd pulled. No, they were going to know exactly who he really was. And when that moment came, there would be no rebuilding. No forgiveness. Only ruin. By July, the quiet storm I had been building for months was ready to break into chaos. Every subtle move, every silent decision, every carefully placed thread had led to this moment. He had been walking through his perfect little world, thinking it was all under control, and now, that illusion was about to shatter in front of everyone. It began with an invitation. His wife's family was hosting a grand summer gathering, a celebration at one of the finest country clubs in the city. Big guest list. Important names. The kind of event where appearances mattered more than anything else. My name was on the guest list this time, not by accident but by design. When I arrived that evening, the air was warm, humming with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. The venue glowed with soft golden lights, polished marble floors, and servers weaving between tables carrying trays of champagne. People were dressed to impress, sharp suits, sparkling jewelry, carefully rehearsed smiles. And then, there he was. My son. He stood near the entrance, greeting guests, trying to wear confidence like a well-fitted suit. But I could see past it. His smile was too tight, his shoulders too stiff, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I knew why. He was holding himself together with the last threads of pride he had left. I walked in calmly, shaking hands, greeting people warmly, blending into the flow of the evening. I didn't approach him immediately. No, that wasn't my style. I let the tension build, like heat simmering under a closed lid. Every so often, I caught his eyes on me, and each time, I smiled faintly and moved on, speaking to the people he wanted to impress the most. Slowly, deliberately, I began talking with his wife's family, the same people who had once looked past me like I didn't exist. But now, I wasn't on the outside looking in anymore. I was at the center. I'd become too valuable to ignore. That shift didn't go unnoticed. I could see the discomfort on his face as I laughed with his father-in-law, as I discussed investments with one of his wife's uncles, as I stood comfortably where he thought only he belonged. The ground beneath him wasn't just cracking now, it was giving way entirely. And then, the moment arrived. The host, his wife's father, called everyone's attention for a short announcement about new business expansions. Expansions I had quietly funded, expansions he assumed would be his chance to shine. But when the announcement came, his name wasn't mentioned once. Instead, they thanked me. The applause echoed through the room like a slow, heavy drumbeat. I nodded politely, raising my glass, while the entire room turned to look at me, and then at him. His smile faltered. His wife's family shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the man they thought held influence had been leaning on me all along. I didn't need to humiliate him directly. The silence did it for me. He stood frozen, glass in hand, forcing a smile that looked more like pain. I watched his jaw tighten, his shoulders stiffen, his breathing shallow as realization hit him. The foundation he thought he built wasn't his. It never was. I had built it. And now, I owned it. After the speech, I saw him slip away from the crowd, disappearing onto the terrace outside. The night air was thick and warm, and when I stepped out minutes later, I found him standing there, staring at the city lights in silence. He didn't hear me approach at first, but when he finally turned and saw me, his expression was a mixture of anger, confusion, and something else, fear. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the muffled music from inside blending with the distant hum of traffic below. Finally, I said just one thing, soft and calm. Sometimes, the people you think you can leave behind are the ones holding everything up. That was it. That was all I gave him. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to threaten. He understood. I walked back inside, leaving him standing there under the warm summer sky, staring at the truth he didn't want to face. When I returned to the room, the whispers had already started. People were piecing together the reality he had worked so hard to hide. His wife's relatives gave him sympathetic glances, while others avoided his gaze entirely. That night, he didn't just lose control. He lost something far more painful, respect. But this wasn't the end. He thought humiliation was the punishment. No. Humiliation was just the beginning. The final blow was still waiting. Christmas came again. 1 year had passed since the night I sat alone in my living room, staring at the blinking lights, waiting for a call that never came. 1 year since the day I stood outside his wife's family home, watching him laugh, watching him lie. 1 year since the betrayal that changed everything. This time, the air outside was colder. Snow covered the streets, lights wrapped around rooftops glowed in soft colors, and everywhere I looked, families were gathering, laughing, living the Christmas I had once loved so much. But this Christmas was different. Because I wasn't the same man anymore. I had spent the past year in silence, pulling strings he didn't know existed, shaping his world without him realizing it. I had watched him lose clients, watched his business sink, watched him slip from confidence into chaos. I had watched his pride unravel in front of his wife's family, watched the respect he once commanded evaporate like fog under sunlight. And now, as the year turned its final page, the stage was set for the ending I had been patiently crafting. I heard through a mutual friend that he was hosting his own Christmas dinner this year. A smaller one, quieter than before, without the big celebrations, without the expensive parties, without the endless crowd of people he used to show off to. It wasn't hard to guess why. Money had grown tighter, his circle had shrunk, and his influence wasn't what it once was. And yet, he didn't invite me. Even after everything. Even after watching his world tilt and twist, he still hadn't learned. But this time, I didn't wait outside in the cold. I made sure my presence reached him long before the night began. 2 days before Christmas, a letter arrived at his doorstep. No return address. Just an elegant white envelope with his name handwritten across it. Inside, a single line. Enjoy your dinner. I'll enjoy mine too. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The night of his Christmas dinner, I arrived at a restaurant across town, the very same restaurant where his wife's family had booked a private event months earlier. The difference this time? The entire venue belonged to me now. Every chandelier, every table, every polished glass, purchased quietly under a different name, just months before. While he sat at home with his reduced guest list, trying to maintain whatever pride he had left, the people he had once tried so hard to impress, his wife's family, business partners, old friends, were here, dining, laughing, celebrating. And every one of them now answered to me. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't show up at his door. I didn't need to. Word would reach him before the night ended. It always did. Sure enough, the next morning, I heard from a friend that he'd found out. His wife's family had casually mentioned the celebration, their words heavy with the new reality. I had become the center of the circle he once excluded me from. The same people he had chosen over me on Christmas Eve the year before were now calling me for advice, for investment, for opportunities. I had taken everything without ever touching him. By noon, my phone rang. It was him. I let it ring. I wanted him to sit in that silence, to feel the weight of every choice he made, every lie he told, every door he closed on me. That silence was louder than any words I could give him. Later that evening, I stood by my window, sipping cocoa, watching snow drift lazily through the streetlights, the same way I had 1 year ago. But this time, there was no ache in my chest, no empty house, no loneliness. I felt peace. Because this wasn't about destroying him anymore. That had already happened. This was about balance. He had left me out in the cold once, and I had made sure he understood what that cold felt like. He had lied to me, erased me, celebrated without me, and now he was living in the world he chose. A world where I didn't need to raise my voice, didn't need to fight, didn't need to ask for a seat at his table. Because I had built my own. And the best part? He knew it. That was the gift I gave myself this Christmas. Not revenge, but control. Not anger, but closure. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's letting them watch you rise higher than they ever imagined, while they sink under the weight of their own choices. And as I turned off the lights that night, I smiled for the first time in a long time. The game was over. I had won. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.